Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. But she did appear on Fox News last night, continuing to defend her agency and ICE operations in the aftermath of two deadly shootings by agents in Minnesota. Sean Hannity asked her whether some statements she and others in the Trump administration made shortly after both incidents were perhaps made prematurely.
Well, Sean, I know you realize that that situation was very chaotic and that we were being relayed information from on the ground from CBP agents and officers that were there. We were using the best information we had at the time, seeking to be transparent with the American people and get them what we knew to be true on the ground. So we will continue to follow the investigation that the FBI is leading and giving them all the information that they need to bring that to a conclusion and make sure that the American people know the truth of the situation and how we can go forward and continue to protect the American people.
People seem to be upset over the term domestic terrorism. Why do you believe that's appropriate? Because you used it in both cases.
Well, Sean, we're continuing to gather information, and the FBI leading this investigation is important to make sure that we talk about both these situations appropriately. In the Renee Good situation, we have more information as it happened previously, and we'll continue to get to the truth of all of this. But we can't distract from the fact of how we got here, and we got here because we had a Biden administration that allowed an invasion over our southern border.
So actually, the FBI leading the investigation in both cases is extremely disturbing and also not normal, and also does not help restore even a tiny bit of public trust. One of the big problems in both the killings of Renee Good, shot at point blank range, one shot right in the front car window through her head, and the killing of Alex Preddy, which actually took 5 ICE agents to get him down to the ground and 2 ICE agents to pepper his body with bullets after he was disarmed. The problem with the FBI leading the investigation, the federal authorities leading the investigation, is that the head of the FBI was also one of the people who rushed to judgment and criticized Alex Preddy for doing something completely legal, which was having a legal firearm on him, which was taken away before they shot him. 2 U.S. citizens shot dead in the street, and Kristi Noem is saying it's so great that the FBI has taken the investigation away from the state. And if you dig a little deeper, even in Hennepin County, all the state officials would very much like their investigations back, please. They would very much like the evidence back, please. A federal judge ruled in the case of Alex Preddy that evidence cannot be destroyed. Yet, where is his gun? Where are the shell casings from the shooting of Alex Preddy? Where's the evidence from the scene that was quickly whisked away? Where are the ICE officers? Who are they? What exactly is the status of the ICE officer who shot Renee Good? Is he on desk duty? We asked repeatedly on this show whether or not the 2 officers, 2 ICE agents who shot Alex Preddy, pointing their guns down toward the ground where he was with his hands showing. So a lot of people call that kind of execution-style shooting. Some are calling it murder. An investigation would help, but not an investigation done by the people who prejudged these cases. Within an hour, they judged the person who appears to be, from all video and all regular, normal people who saw what happened, appears to be the victim. But we don't know. You want an investigation, and yet you take the investigation away from the very people who should be doing the investigation because it is their jurisdiction, and that is the law. It's also their community, and they will do a better job. And, when you detain people who are witnesses, and you detain people who saw it, that's scary. That scares people, and that instills, on top of all this chaos bred by ICE agents just marauding through town and breaking in cars and houses, that scares people and adds to the already created chaos by the government. So one thing that would really help is if the state could have their investigations back, please, so that these 2 killings at close range could be investigated in a real way that the public would trust. So meanwhile, during his news conference yesterday, border czar Tom Homan acknowledged that mistakes had been made. So you have one person in the government acknowledging that mistakes had been made by federal officers in Minnesota. I think Stephen Miller also said that procedure or protocol wasn't followed. Okay, well, that's the start, but then where's the investigation? Give it back to the state. Adding Homan that he wants to make the operation safer, more efficient, and by the book. He also said there could be a drawdown. There could be a drawdown of agents there. But President Trump last night appeared to contradict him.
Will you be pulling back immigration enforcement agents out of Minnesota?
We want to keep our country safe. We'll do whatever we can to keep our country safe.
So not pulling back?
No, not at all.
Again, contradicting what Tom Homan said earlier in the day. Meanwhile, a new report details the ongoing power struggle behind the scenes of President Trump's immigration enforcement efforts as officials overseeing the campaign fight amongst each other for power. Joining us now, staff writer at The Atlantic, Michael Scherer. He co-wrote the piece titled "Battles Are Raging Inside the Department of Homeland Security." Michael, good morning. So, among which members of the cabinet are these battles raging?
So for quite a while now, there have been two camps when it comes to how the deportation should proceed, and two camps when it comes to how the wall on the border should be built. Tom Homan, who you just saw there, and Rodney Scott, the head of Customs and Border Patrol, are in one camp. On the other side, you have Kristi Noem and her top deputies, including Corey Lewandowski, her functioning chief of staff, a special government employee, who have been pushing for more aggressive measures. You know, when Greg Bovino was in Minnesota, he wasn't reporting to his boss, the head of CBP. He's a CBP officer. He was reporting basically around his boss to Noem, and Rodney Scott had made clear he wasn't comfortable with the methods Bovino was using. Tom Homan made very clear yesterday that he also had concerns with how things have been going. So you've had sort of a shakeup. The president has acknowledged in this power struggle. You know, the president from the first term, the second term, doesn't mind these disagreements. He doesn't mind having people fight amongst themselves below him. But the fight is very much still live. On Monday, we reported Rodney Scott put out a memo to CBP, an email saying, "I just want to remind you all, I'm in charge of this agency. Everything comes through me." And 2 days later, the General Counsel of the Department of Homeland Security effectively rescinded that memo, saying it hadn't gone through legal review. So there's very much a bureaucratic war still ongoing inside the department.
So, Michael, there's a lot of attention being paid to Tom Homan right now that he's in Minnesota. I think the piece does a really good job explaining something, that the goals of these two camps are actually pretty similar. The disagreement is over tactics and how it's done. Can you flesh that out for those watching?
Yeah, this isn't really an ideological disagreement. My co-author, Nick Miroff, puts it by saying this is a divide between institutional MAGA and a more disruptive MAGA. Noem has taken her marching orders from Stephen Miller, who's been really driving the government to meet these benchmarks. There's quotas for daily arrests, trying to get the wall built quicker. Homan and Scott are people who came up through the bureaucracy. They're lifelong agents. There's a way of doing things. They're law enforcement officers. They actually understand that there are reasons for the paperwork and the rules and the caution you take in approaching these things, because things can go out of control like they did in Minneapolis. There's no doubt, I think, at this point in the White House and the administration that what happened last weekend was not good. I mean, you have everybody walking back. The president was very clear he wanted de-escalation, and that's what they're bringing about. Everyone says the same thing, which is we're going after the worst of the worst. We're going after criminals. And if we come across other undocumented immigrants along the way, they will be detained too. How that plays out in practice is very different in the two camps. And it's not really being discussed. You know, Bovino basically was encouraging people to look everywhere. And you know, we had reports that Miller was saying, you know, go to parking lots and look for anybody you can find. That's not going after the worst of the worst. That's just picking people up. Homan has made clear that he's much more interested in a more targeted approach where you actually do have a list of names of people with criminal records, He is clear that, if we find undocumented immigrants along the way, they will be detained too and deported. But the suggestion here is that he's not going to be quite as aggressive in just trying to get, stop cars on the street to get people out of the country.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Buehmiller, Tom Homan used the word drawdown. He alluded to some sort of deal about focusing on the prisons, working with the governor about that. I think in his press conference and in his statements, he alluded to changes coming, but then the president completely undermining it later in the day. What questions might you have for Michael?
Well, I would ask you, what's interesting to me is that what Tom Homan is doing seems to be supported by a majority of Americans, that go after the criminals. That is what people thought they were voting for when they voted for Donald Trump. We need to get the criminals out of the country. And it would seem to me that Kristi Noem is undercutting that effort by the tactics they're using. So the question I have is, shouldn't Donald Trump be supporting what Tom Homan is saying? Right. It would be more acceptable to Americans.
Yeah, there's definitely a real tension here. Yeah. If you could remember the first term, we had the child separation policy.
Correct, yeah.
Miller was driving it. The goal of that policy was deterrence. Like the cruelty of that, the struggles that went around that was deterrence. We have seen something similar happening here. The Bovino spectacle of going in and militarizing all these cities was meant to intimidate, was meant to scare people. And that is not politically popular. And you saw in the first term they had to pull back from the child separation policy. I think there's a pullback happening here. I don't think we know how long that's going to last. We don't know if this is permanent. We know the president felt burned over the weekend, and everyone has pulled back this week, including Kristi Noem, from the aggressive tactics. But we don't know, when the next city will be targeted and whether some of these methods will return, and whether this fight, which is, as I said, very live, whether Homan and Scott continue to have the upper hand. Well,
and you bring up, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, whether there's going to be a drawdown. There's already been so much damage done. There are so many cases that are hanging out there, and some that haven't even been addressed, of people who've been abused, had their rights violated, who are separated from their families, children involved. This is still very much a mess, for sure. The new reporting is online now for The Atlantic. Staff writer Michael Scherer, thank you very much for your reporting this morning. And writer at large for The New York Times, Elizabeth Buehmiller, thank you as well.